Flight crew demands black woman apologize for husband's role. Shock everyone. He's fired immediately. Imagine being judged not by your actions but by the color of your skin. This story isn't just about one woman's resilience. It's about confronting systemic discrimination and demanding accountability. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about injustice. It's about courage, karma, and the power of standing up for what's right. We want to know if you are excited about this story by typing yes or no below in the comments section. Your feedback is really the driving force for us to collect more touching and meaningful stories. More meaningful. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. The airport buzzed with activity, a symphony of announcements, rolling suitcases, and hurried conversations. Gate 12 was no different, alive with the subtle tension of passengers preparing to board. The hum of fluorescent lights reflected off sleek, tiled floors as people adjusted their belongings and juggled boarding passes. Mia Johnson entered the scene, her presence commanding attention. Her tailored navy suit hugged her tall, elegant frame, and her polished leather handbag swayed lightly at her side. The scarf around her neck, a delicate silk piece gifted by her husband, Marcus, added a touch of color to her otherwise professional ensemble. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, announcing her arrival as she approached the gate agent with an air of quiet confidence. She handed over her first-class boarding pass with a polite smile. The young gate agent hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty before darting toward a nearby figure. Standing by the counter was Captain Richard Blake, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose sharp uniform and square jaw radiated authority, an authority tinged with arrogance. His narrowed eyes locked onto Mia, scrutinizing her in a way that made her skin prickle. "First class?" the gate agent asked softly, as if doubting his own words. "Yes," Mia replied, her tone calm but firm. She had encountered this hesitation before, the unspoken challenge hidden behind polite tones. As the gate agent prepared to scan her ticket, Captain Blake stepped forward, planting a firm hand on the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ma'am, are you sure you're at the right gate?" Mia turned her gaze to him, her expression unflinching. "Quite sure," she replied, her voice even. Blake chuckled, a sound that grated like nails on a chalkboard. "We don't often see passengers like you in first class," he said, his words trailing off but his implication hanging heavily in the air. Mia's lips tightened into a thin line. She had heard this before. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" she asked coolly. The gate agent shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the scanner as if willing it to work faster. Blake, however, remained unyielding. "Just following protocol," he said. "Security concerns, you understand." Mia's jaw clenched, but she maintained her composure. "If there's a legitimate issue, I'd like to know what it is. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you let me board." Blake smirked, clearly enjoying the growing attention from nearby passengers. "Let's just say I like to make sure everything runs smoothly on my flights. We've had incidents recently." Murmurs rippled through the waiting area, passengers exchanging uneasy glances. Some averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved, while others watched with curiosity. Mia refused to shrink under the weight of their stares. Years of facing moments like this had taught her that her dignity was her greatest weapon. "I'll call my husband," she said simply, reaching into her bag for her phone. Blake laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "By all means," he sneered. "But no phone call will change the rules." Mia didn't respond. She dialed Marcus's number, her voice steady as she spoke. "Marcus, I need you at gate 12, now." Blake's smirk widened as he leaned closer. "No one's coming to save you," he muttered, just loud enough for Mia to hear. She returned her phone to her bag and stepped aside. "I'll wait," she said, her tone unbroken. Minutes ticked by, the tension growing thicker with every passing moment. The passengers whispered amongst themselves, their curiosity now fully piqued. Mia stood still, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the terminal. When Marcus Johnson arrived, the air seemed to shift. His tall frame and commanding presence parted the small crowd with ease. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, he exuded authority that was impossible to ignore. His dark eyes burned with quiet intensity as they locked onto Blake. Blake's smugness faltered slightly as Marcus strode toward the counter, his steps measured and deliberate. Mia felt a wave of relief wash over her, though she wouldn't let it show. "Mia," Marcus said, his voice calm but laced with steel. She stepped forward to meet him. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady. Marcus turned to the gate agent, his tone sharp and precise. "I'd like an explanation as to why my wife is being prevented from boarding her flight." The young gate agent stammered, his eyes flicking nervously to Blake. Blake stepped forward, regaining his composure. "I'm ensuring the safety of my passengers," he said smoothly. "Your wife raised concerns." Marcus's brow furrowed, his tone sharpening. "Concerns? She presented a valid ticket, didn't she?" Blake hesitated, but only for a moment. "Well, yes, but I have the authority to make decisions regarding passenger safety." Marcus's voice dropped, each word cutting like a blade. "And what exactly about my wife makes her a safety concern?" Blake's bravado slipped, but he quickly recovered. "I don't have to justify my decisions to you," he said with a dismissive smirk. Marcus stepped closer, towering over him. "You do now." The gate fell silent, the crowd holding their breath. Marcus's presence was undeniable, and his next words would shatter Blake's smug facade. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he said evenly, "owner of this airline." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Blake's face drained of color. The gate agent froze, his scanner forgotten in his hands. Blake stammered, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of Marcus's revelation. "Your actions today have humiliated my wife and jeopardized the integrity of this company," Marcus continued, his voice cold and unwavering. "Consider this your last day in uniform." Blake began to protest, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "Security will escort you off the premises. Effective immediately, your credentials are revoked." As security officers approached to remove Blake, scattered applause broke out among the passengers. Marcus turned to Mia, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Mia gave him a small smile, her composure intact. "I am now." With that, Marcus ensured Mia was the first to board the flight, leaving behind a stunned and silent crowd. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was the beginning of a much larger fight for justice. The murmurs from the gathered crowd grew louder as the reality of Marcus Johnson's statement began to sink in. Owner of the airline. The weight of his words seemed to paralyze the space around Gate 12. Passengers exchanged incredulous glances, some whispering in awe, while others simply stared, unable to process what had just unfolded. Captain Richard Blake, once so smug and self-assured, now stood frozen, his face a mix of disbelief and panic. His attempts to salvage the situation were pitiful and unconvincing. "Mr. Johnson, this is all a misunderstanding. I was only—" Marcus didn't let him finish. His voice, low and unyielding, cut through Blake's rambling like a knife. "There's no misunderstanding here. Your behavior today has not only disrespected my wife, but also jeopardized the values this company stands for." He gestured to the approaching security team. "Escort him off the premises," Marcus instructed, his tone calm yet final. "And make sure his credentials are revoked immediately. Captain Blake is no longer employed by this airline." Blake's protests grew louder as the security officers took hold of his arms. "You can't do this. I've been with this company for over 10 years. Marcus turned to him one last time, his expression steely. "And in those 10 years, how many others have you treated like this?" Blake's response was drowned out as he was escorted away, his voice fading into the background. A ripple of applause broke out among the passengers, hesitant at first but growing louder. Some clapped in support of Marcus's actions. Others, still processing the scene, nodded in approval. Marcus turned back to Mia, his demeanor softening as he approached her. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice quieter now, meant only for her. Mia gave him a faint smile, her composure still intact despite the storm they had just weathered. "I'm fine," she said. Thank you for coming. The gate agent, now visibly shaken, hurried to scan Mia's ticket and usher her toward the boarding tunnel. Mrs. Johnson, please, right this way, he stammered, his hands trembling. Marcus followed closely behind, ensuring Mia was settled before boarding himself. Once seated in the plush comfort of first class, the tension of the incident began to ease. Mia adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, her gaze fixed on the cabin window. I can't believe that just happened, she murmured, half to herself. Marcus leaned closer, his hand resting lightly on hers. You shouldn't have had to deal with it, he said firmly. But it won't happen again, not to you and not to anyone else. Mia nodded, her resolve quietly strengthening. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, she turned to her husband, her voice steady. We can't let this slide. It's not just about me. It's about fixing what allowed someone like Blake to act that way in the first place. Marcus's lips curved into a small smile, his admiration for her evident. We won't let it slide, he promised. The hum of the plane's engines grew louder as they lifted into the air, leaving the chaos of the terminal behind. But for Marcus and Mia, the journey ahead had only just begun. The incident wasn't just a fleeting moment of injustice. It was the catalyst for change. The hum of the airplane engines still resonated in Mia Johnson's mind as she sat across from Marcus in their penthouse the following evening. The city's skyline twinkled behind them, but Mia's focus was elsewhere. Her hands clasped a steaming cup of tea as she replayed the events at Gate 12. This can't keep happening, she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with determination. What happened yesterday wasn't just about me. It's part of something bigger, a culture that allows people like Captain Blake to operate unchecked. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. You're absolutely right, and if there's anyone who can change it, it's you. Mia raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Me? Yes, you, Marcus replied with a small smile. You've seen it firsthand, you've lived it, and you have the strength to do something about it. I want you to take the lead on this. Redefine how we approach inclusivity and accountability within the airline. Mia hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. I wouldn't even know where to start. Marcus leaned forward, placing his hand over hers. Start with what you know. Focus on what needs to change. I'll back you every step of the way. His confidence sparked something in Mia. For years, she had endured microaggressions, subtle biases, and outright discrimination with grace and resilience. Now, she had an opportunity to turn those experiences into something transformative. A week later, Mia was officially introduced as the head of the airline's newly formed Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. The announcement stirred mixed reactions across the company. Some applauded the initiative, while others whispered skepticism, unsure how her appointment would play out. Mia wasted no time. Her first actions were bold. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, from ground staff to executives, aimed at uncovering and addressing unconscious biases. An anonymous reporting system managed by a third-party firm, ensuring employees could report issues without fear of retaliation. Leadership accountability measures, requiring managers and executives to undergo regular evaluations tied to diversity benchmarks. These aren't just policies, Mia explained during a company-wide meeting. These are the first steps toward building a culture where everyone feels valued and respected. Her first major hurdle came during a meeting with the airline's executive board. The sleek conference room, with its glass walls and minimalist decor, felt both imposing and sterile. Mia stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding. Marcus sat at the far end, his silent support a reassuring anchor. Thank you for joining me today, Mia began, her voice calm but resolute. Yesterday's incident at Gate 14 wasn't an isolated one. It was a symptom of systemic issues we've ignored for too long. We cannot move forward as a company if we allow these behaviors to persist. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others avoided her gaze. Finally, Richard, an older board member with decades in the industry, leaned forward. With all due respect, Mrs. Johnson, these changes you're proposing are disruptive, he said, his tone measured but dismissive. Our employees are already overwhelmed, and this initiative will only add to their burden. Mia met his gaze without flinching. Disruption is exactly what we need, Mr. Harris. Comfort has allowed discrimination to thrive unchecked. These changes aren't a burden. They're an investment in our company's integrity. Another board member, Julia, a younger woman, chimed in. I see the value in this, but what about the anonymous reporting system? Some of our senior staff are concerned it could lead to false accusations. Mia nodded, acknowledging the concern. False reports are rare, but the fear of retaliation for legitimate concerns is rampant. The reporting system will be paired with thorough investigations to ensure fairness. Accountability is non-negotiable. Richard scoffed softly but said nothing. Mia continued, her tone firm. We cannot call ourselves a company of excellence while tolerating prejudice. These changes will happen with or without your support. Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. After the meeting, Marcus found Mia in her office, reviewing notes. You didn't hold back, he said, a trace of admiration in his voice. I couldn't, she replied, leaning back in her chair. If they're serious about change, they'll rise to the occasion. If not, they'll expose themselves. Marcus smiled. You're remarkable, you know that? Mia shook her head with a small laugh. Flattery won't get you out of dinner duty tonight. The tension lifted briefly, but Mia's mind was already racing with the challenges ahead. Resistance from leadership was just the beginning. The real test would come in implementing these changes across every level of the company. The following weeks were grueling. Mia attended countless meetings, oversaw the rollout of training sessions, and addressed concerns from employees. She faced pushback at every turn, but she remained undeterred. Her efforts began to show results. Employees who had previously felt silent started using the anonymous reporting system. Managers began to approach diversity training with an open mind, recognizing their own biases. Late one evening, as Marcus joined her in the office, she looked up from her laptop. Do you think it's enough? She asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's more than enough, and it's only the beginning. Mia nodded, her resolve hardening. She had set the foundation for change. Now it was time to build something lasting. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but Mia was ready. For her, this wasn't just about fixing an airline, it was about redefining an entire culture. The morning was crisp, with sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows of the airport. Passengers moved briskly through the terminal, their chatter blending into the background hum of announcements and rolling suitcases. For most, it was an ordinary travel day. But for Mia Johnson, another storm was brewing. Seated in her office at the airline's headquarters, Mia was reviewing employee survey data when her assistant entered, her expression tense. Mrs. Johnson, she said, her voice hurried. There's a situation at gate 25. You need to see this. Mia took the tablet her assistant handed her. The live feed from the security cameras showed a tall, well-dressed black man standing at the gate counter. His posture was calm, but his frustration was evident as he spoke with the gate agent, who appeared defensive and flustered. Mia's chest tightened as she watched the interaction unfold. The scene felt all too familiar. Pushing aside her personal emotions, she grabbed her blazer and rose from her chair. Contact Marcus and let him know what's happening, she instructed. I'm heading there now. When Mia arrived at gate 25, a small crowd had gathered. Passengers whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued by the tension in the air. Security stood nearby, unsure how to proceed. To Gwen's surprise, a strong hold of the gate passengers had been firmly settled. The gate agent, a young woman named Clara, froze when she saw Mia approach. Mrs. Johnson? Clara stammered, her face pale. I didn't realize. Mia raised a hand to silence her, her expression calm but firm. What's going on here? The passenger, who had remained composed despite the growing tension, stepped forward. My name is Anthony Carter, he said, his tone polite but laced with frustration. I was told my ticket needed further verification, even though I've presented my ID and confirmation number. Mia turned her sharp gaze to Clara. Is that true? Clara hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. I thought his ticket might be fraudulent, she said weakly. What? Mia asked, her voice steady but cutting. "What about this man, or his ticket, seemed suspicious to you?" Clara's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. Her silence spoke volumes. Mr. Carter folded his arms, his frustration now evident. "I have flown with this airline for years without issue," he said, his voice steady. "Today I'm being treated like a criminal. Why?" Mia nodded, acknowledging his point before addressing the gate agent. "Clara," she began, her tone firm but measured, "this is exactly the kind of behavior we're working to eliminate. Mr. Carter was humiliated in front of his peers because of your assumptions. That's unacceptable." She turned to my father. Clara's eyes filled with tears and her voice trembled. "I didn't mean any harm. I want—" "Harm was done," Mia interrupted, her voice unyielding, "and accountability is key." She gestured for a nearby supervisor to step forward. "Escort Mr. Carter to first class," she instructed. "Ensure he's comfortable and fully compensated for his time." The supervisor nodded and led Mr. Carter toward the boarding tunnel, apologizing quietly as they walked away. Turning back to Clara, Mia's expression softened slightly. "I understand that unconscious bias can influence decisions," she said. "That's why we've implemented training and new policies to prevent situations like this." Clara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I've attended the sessions, Mrs. Johnston. I thought I was doing the right thing." Mia sighed, recognizing the mix of ignorance and good intentions that often perpetuated these issues. "Mistakes happen, Clara, but they come with consequences. You'll be required to attend additional training, and for now, you're suspended pending investigation." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she nodded. "I understand," she whispered. Later that evening, Mia recounted the incident to Marcus as they sat in their living room. The glow of the fireplace bathed the room in warm light, but her voice was tinged with weariness. "You handled it perfectly," Marcus said, his tone reassuring. "This is exactly why you're leading this effort." Mia leaned back against the plush cushions, her thoughts distant. "It's progress," she admitted, "but it's also a reminder of how far we still have to go. People like Clara don't act out of malice, they act out of ignorance, and ignorance is harder to fight." Marcus reached over, taking her hand in his. "You're fighting it every day," he said, "and every day, you're making a difference." Mia smiled faintly, her resolve rekindled. "I just hope it's enough." "It will be," Marcus said with certainty, "because you won't stop until it is." Mia nodded, her determination solidifying. The incident at Gate 25 had reinforced the importance of her mission. It wasn't just about policies or procedures, it was about changing mindsets and dismantling biases that had been ingrained for too long. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for every passenger who had been judged unfairly, every employee who feared speaking out, and every person who believed in a better, more equitable future. This wasn't just her battle, it was a movement, and she was ready to lead it. Months after Mia Johnson launched her diversity and inclusion initiatives, the airline's culture began to shift in ways both visible and profound. What had once been an environment where biases and microaggressions went unchecked was now becoming a space of accountability, awareness, and growth. Employees across all levels reported feeling a renewed sense of trust in the organization. The anonymous reporting system, initially met with skepticism, became a cornerstone of the company's transformation. Employees who once feared retaliation now felt empowered to share their experiences. One flight attendant shared her thoughts during a feedback session. "For the first time in my career, I feel like the company is listening. It's not just talk anymore, there's real action behind the words." Passengers, too, began to notice the changes. Positive comments about the airline's commitment to inclusivity appeared on social media and in customer surveys. A frequent flyer posted, "I've flown with this airline for years, but recently something feels different. The staff seems more attentive and respectful. It's clear they're prioritizing equality and respect, and I'm here for it." Mia's training programs, which required everyone from entry-level staff to top executives to confront their biases, were met with initial resistance but ultimately praised for their impact. Managers, who had previously been reluctant to participate, admitted that the sessions opened their eyes. One senior manager remarked, "I didn't realize how much my own unconscious biases affected my decisions. These sessions are challenging, but they're necessary." The ripple effects of Mia's work extended beyond her airline. Competing carriers began reaching out, requesting her guidance on implementing similar programs. Industry leaders lauded her efforts, and trade publications featured her as a trailblazer for inclusivity in aviation. One article titled "Redefining Skies: How Mia Johnson is Leading an Industry Revolution" praised her for addressing systemic issues head-on and setting a new standard for the aviation world. Mia was invited to speak at industry conferences, sharing her strategies and vision with executives and policymakers. Her message was clear: true progress requires discomfort. It means questioning long-held practices and building a culture where respect and equity aren't just goals, they're non-negotiables. As accolades poured in, Mia remained focused. For her, the work wasn't about recognition. It was about creating lasting change. She often reminded her team, this isn't just about fixing one airline, it's about reshaping an industry. Under Mia's leadership, the airline had evolved into a model of inclusivity. It was a transformation that inspired not only employees and passengers, but an entire industry, proving that meaningful change was both possible and necessary. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation, as former Captain Richard Blake's wrongful termination lawsuit against the airline reached its final stages. Blake, dismissed after his discriminatory actions at Gate 12, claimed his firing was unjust. For Mia Johnson, however, this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a chance to reaffirm the airline's commitment to equity and accountability. Taking the stand, Mia's presence was commanding, her voice steady as she delivered her testimony. "This is not about one man losing his job," she said, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. "This is about ensuring that every passenger, regardless of their race, gender, or background, can travel without fear of prejudice or humiliation." Captain Blake's behavior was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of systemic issues we are working to dismantle. Her words resonated deeply, not just with the judge and jury, but with those in attendance. She detailed the steps the airline had taken since the incident: mandatory diversity training, anonymous reporting systems, and leadership accountability measures. Mia's testimony painted a clear picture of an organization determined to evolve and hold individuals accountable for their actions. Blake's defense faltered under the weight of evidence and public opinion. His record of discriminatory behavior, brought to light during the proceedings, revealed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. When the judge delivered the verdict, the courtroom erupted in murmurs of approval. Blake's case was dismissed, a symbolic victory for the airline and a public acknowledgement that discrimination would not be tolerated. The outcome sent a powerful message. It strengthened the airline's resolve to pursue equity at every level and bolstered Mia's efforts to create lasting change. For Mia, the victory wasn't just a legal one. It was a step toward justice and a reaffirmation of her mission to reshape the culture of an entire industry. Years after Mia Johnson's confrontation at Gate 12, her efforts had blossomed into a transformative legacy that transcended the airline industry. What began as a fight against personal injustice became a movement for systemic change, reshaping not just the culture of her company, but influencing national policies and sparking a ripple effect across industries. Mia's expertise and leadership caught the attention of federal policymakers, leading to an invitation to join a federal task force on combating discrimination across all modes of transportation. As a key member, she worked tirelessly to develop comprehensive policies aimed at ensuring equity for passengers and employees nationwide. Her voice carried weight in pivotal discussions, and her ability to marry data-driven strategies with human empathy made her a force for meaningful change. Sarah ran the task force on combating discrimination across all modes of transportation. Among her contributions was a landmark policy that required mandatory bias training for transportation professionals and the establishment of an anonymous reporting system for misconduct, concepts directly inspired by the initiatives she implemented at her airline. These measures became a gold standard, earning praise from advocacy groups and government leaders alike. At her airline, Mia's initiatives, now collectively known as the Robinson Initiative, became a model for other companies to follow. The initiative included mandatory training, employee accountability systems, and regular evaluations of company culture to ensure inclusivity remained a core value. Other airlines, inspired by her work, began adopting similar measures, creating a more equitable experience for passengers and employees across the aviation industry. Mia and Marcus's journey also became a source of inspiration for many. Their story, one of resilience, partnership, and courage, resonated deeply with those who had faced similar struggles. It showed that standing up against systemic inequities wasn't just an act of defiance, but a catalyst for progress. Their work inspired a generation of young leaders, particularly women and minorities, to pursue careers in aviation and other industries where representation had been historically lacking. Many saw Mia's journey as proof that change was possible, and that one person's determination could dismantle barriers others thought insurmountable. Reflecting on her journey, Mia often said, "The fight for equality isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. It's not just about what we change today, but about planting seeds that will grow into a better future for generations to come." At a ceremony years later, Mia and Marcus stood together as a new class of airline employees graduated from a training program renamed in her honor. Watching the graduates, Mia felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had started as a humiliating encounter at a boarding gate had grown into a movement that reshaped an industry and inspired countless others to act. Her legacy wasn't just a testament to the power of resilience and advocacy. It was a reminder that change begins with the courage to challenge what's wrong and the determination to build something better. Through her work, Mia showed the world that true progress isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, vision, and the belief that every act of justice brings us closer to equality. Mia Johnson's story is more than a tale of resilience and leadership. It's a call to each of us to reflect on the world around us and take action. Her journey reminds us that progress isn't achieved in isolation. It requires courage, advocacy, and the collective effort of individuals committed to justice. Think about the moments in your life where you've seen prejudice or inequality. How did you respond? What could you have done differently? Mia's story challenges us to not only confront these questions, but to act. Advocacy doesn't have to be grand. It can start with small, meaningful steps. Speaking up when something is wrong, supporting policies that promote equity, and encouraging conversations about inclusion in your own circles. Let this story inspire you to look for ways to create positive change in your community, workplace, or school. Share Mia's journey with others to spark important discussions about fairness, respect, and accountability. The more we talk about these issues, the closer we come to dismantling the biases that divide us. We're grateful that you've joined us in exploring this powerful story. Your time and attention matter, and they're the first steps in building awareness. If Mia's journey resonated with you, please share this video with your friends and family. Let's spread the message that dignity and respect are rights, not privileges. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay connected with more stories of resilience and change. Together, we can amplify voices like Mia's and inspire others to stand up for what's right. Together, let's create a world where dignity and respect are universal rights, not privileges. Thank you for watching.